I'm going to welcome you all that are participating out there tonight, and certainly to our distinguished panel members. My name is Christy Coons, and I'm part of the Emmanuel planning team for this evening. This is the second year that we've created the Zoom format program, and it allows us to invite panelists from out of town and also to gather an audience from beyond Kern County, which I'd say is a rare COVID-created gift. Our program tonight, Faith-ful Home, Home is Viewed by World Religions, is part of the programming created for Kern County's One Book Project, which is our county-wide reading and discussion initiative. And of course, this year's book that we have keyed our themes off of is A Dream Called Home, a memoir by Reina Grande. The One Book Project is coordinated by the Kern County Library and California State University Bakersfield's first-year experience program, along with many community partners such as Emmanuel. It was begun in 2002, and literally hundreds of people each year across the county are reading the book and discussing its powerful themes in programs such as ours tonight. This is the fifth year that Emmanuel has created a panel discussion for One Book. And it is our aim always to create a compelling conversation looking at the themes of each year's book from a faith-based perspective. The panelists will lift that perspective up for us tonight, but it's going to be up to us, the audience members, to ask the kind of questions and make the kind of comments to the panelists that will create that compelling conversation. So at this point, let me introduce you to Melanie Paterniti, who is our evening Zoom technician. Melanie.
Hi, everybody. As Christy said, we've been in this pandemic for a while now, and I'm sure a lot of us are more comfortable and familiar with the Zoom environment. But just a few reminders. We're going to ask everyone who's not speaking to keep their sound on mute, to cut down on distractions and audio feedback. This discussion is being recorded, and in a few days, maybe a week or two, whenever it's edited sufficiently, it will be available on the Emmanuel YouTube channel page, which is Emmanuel Lutheran Baker Street. We will have some time set aside at the end of the discussion for question and answer. We're asking people to, if you have a question, to enter it into the chat box. If you see it along the bottom, there's a chat with a little speech bubble. If you click that, it'll pop the chat up. I will be monitoring the chat box throughout the evening and compiling all the questions as we go along. So if you think of something at any point in time, please enter it. I'll compile it. It won't get lost. And it's a good way to make sure your question gets asked. Once we get through the chat questions, we will be, if there's time remaining, we might look at opening it up for people to ask questions themselves. And the best way to do that will be to raise your hand, which you can do by along the bottom. There's a button for reactions. If you click that, there will be a place where you can click raise hand, and Pastor Dawn will be watching for that and fielding those questions. And with that, I will hand it back over to Christy.
Thank you, Melanie. It's my pleasure to introduce our very distinguished panel tonight. Reverend H.T. Calhoun was born in Bakersfield and raised in Buttonwillow. And for almost 4 decades, he has served as pastor of Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church. Mount Zion is 135 years old and founded close to its current location at the corner of California Avenue and P Streets in 1886, making it certainly one of the oldest churches in Kern County. Pastor Calhoun also serves as moderator of the San Joaquin Missionary Baptist Association, including churches in the Valley, as well as several throughout Bakersfield. Alan Salazar is a Chumash and Tataviam tribe elder and a native storyteller, and a published author. His ancestors were brought into the San Fernando mission in 1799. He is a founding member of the Kern County Native American Heritage Preservation Council and has been a preschool teacher and a juvenile institution officer. He has done professional education programs at schools, museums, and cultural events nationwide and even worldwide. He is a traditional paddler and a builder of Chumash canoes. Mr. Angel Mehta represents the Hindu religion on our panel tonight. Dr. Mehta is retired from his medical practice in Bakersfield. He serves as president of the Chimaya Mission Bakersfield, a Hindu religious and spiritual organization. Dr. Mehta has this to say about his spiritual life. I was influenced in my spiritual journey by my mother. As a teenager, she took me to meet and listen to all great religious masters of that time in India, including Swami Chinmayananda. That is how I was inspired to study spirituality and join Chinmaya Mission. Rabbi Jonathan Klein serves as rabbi of Temple Bethel in East Bakersfield while living in Los Angeles. In addition to leading worship, teaching, and supporting his congregants' spiritual journeys, Rabbi Klein has been active on boards and nonprofits supporting social and economic justice for low-income Angelenos and now those most vulnerable in Bakersfield. He is a staunch promoter of bipartisanship, saying, "It is incumbent upon all of us to wake up to the wisdom of those with completely different worldviews." Our panel moderator tonight, Pastor Dawn Wilder, has served as pastor of Emmanuel Lutheran since 2017. She has a rich variety of life experience, having served as a classroom teacher and operated drop-in center for homeless and underprivileged youth in West Hollywood for 10 years. She has worked as a hospice chaplain and bereavement counselor and completed a 2-year residency in clinical pastoral education at the UCLA Medical Center. She also holds a MA in technology-based education from CSU Dominguez Hills. All skills that have come in very handy for Emmanuel on Baker Street. So at this point, I will turn it over to Pastor Dawn.
I want to join Christy in welcoming all of you to this evening's panel. This year's one book read, it is a Dream Called Home, and it's a memoir that tells the story of the author. She immigrated to the United States as a teen. She was in an unfamiliar country with, she really had very few resources. And yet she was able to graduate college and become a writer. And as we read the book, we see that along the way, she reaches her lifelong goal, her dream of having a true home. And it's here where she makes a distinction between the house that her father bought and the home that she built. There's house and home. It's physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual. And I know at Emmanuel, we often talk of having a church home. And we've always said that this was more than the building, that it was really all about the people. And I think it actually took the pandemic to really start to believe the truth in this. When suddenly we weren't able to gather together in person in our building. would we still be church? And the answer is yes. It's also complicated. And we find ourselves now in a new discovery, a new inquiry. You know, where does our faith find its home? Tonight, we are truly excited to add to this inquiry. Please join me in welcoming Pastor Calhoun, Elder Alan Salazar, Dr. Anil Mehta, and Rabbi Jonathan Klein. Pastor Calhoun, would you please start us off this evening?
Good evening to those who are gathered to be part of this opportunity to speak. I was reading a book called The History of the Black Baptist Church. The title is I Don't Feel No Ways Tired. And the author is Dr. Wayne Croft. He's the Baptist Church as it unfolds in today into America in the past. The history of the Black people as they came to America, they came as slaves from their native soil, and they were sold away from their families in America, and they were forced to work without pay. But in the 19th century, the Black church came into existence as an independent institution. Prior to this time, it was an invisible institution, and many of the community resources emerged through the Black church. When you look at the Black church, you find that even though they were in slavery, they still had a way of looking at God. For many times, they went back to the Old Testament and seen what was happening when the Jews were in slavery in Egypt. And so many of our songs, especially our spiritual songs, come from Go Down Moses. Sometimes they sung Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Simply mean when they were in slavery, they felt death would be the only way that they could find their freedom. So many communities was developed here in America through slavery. The families were separated. There was no fathers in the home because in slavery, families were separated, children were moved from their homes, and mothers were disfranchised. And so when the Black church came along, they laid a foundation that the family could have some semblance of independence. When I was growing up, my family, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and those who were part of my coming into this world, they were able to lead me into Christianity. We find that in the church, the pastor played a major role. He was the one who dictated what went on in the community. We find that in the community, we had men who were deacons. That was a role that they played. During the week, they worked in the fields. During the week, they were brutalized. But when it came to the church, they found themselves being important people. And so we find that things began to happen. We had what we called the Freemasons. We had societies. We had mission, which were the women who were part of the church. We had benevolence programs that took care of those who had needs. And so during this time, because of our faith, we depended on God to provide for us and to sustain us. And so it transformed us into a people who trusted in God. The uniqueness of the spiritual songs lies in their reflection of the faith or the caring of the life of the Black church. So the Black church played a very important role in the community. If you lived in the South or lived in the North, those in the South depended upon the church. When it was going through persecution, when people were being hung, when homes were destroyed, they turned to the word of God. And so the institution of the church became a powerful, significant place. Also in the church, we find that politics was able to lift people up. Many of our colleges, many of our schools came out of the church. Many of the occupations were a church there in South Carolina that built upon training preachers, and they also trained nurses to go back into the community. We have agricultural colleges also in the South where many of the landowners who were Blacks was able to go to these colleges and learn how to grow their crops. And as they left the South, they went to the North. And as they went to the North, they took their upbringing with them, and they made sure wherever they went, they found a church home where they could find complacency, found a church home where they could find a sense of freedom. So economics played a very important part of the church. That also we call moral support played an important part of the church. There were bereavement committees that helped those who had died and who had passed on. In 1787, Absalom Jones and Reverend Allen came up through the Methodist Church, and they supported their members in sickness. They supported the members who survived. They took care of the children who came from deceased families. They also had financial well as concern for an offering. So a lot of these things happened within the Black church. Now, we didn't have a whole lot of money, but we had a whole lot of love for one another. In the Black church, we began to let our young men know going into the military was a way that they could achieve honor and greatness. We had the Tuskegee Airmen who fought, in World War II over there in Germany. Many of the Black soldiers find themselves in situations. And then when they came out of the service, there were some jobs that, we could not take. We became porters on trains. We began to work for the post office. And then from the 50s and the 60s emerged what we call the movement or the Black movement or the empowerment. Many of the songs that came through the Black church, we have Aretha Franklin. Her father was a great pastor in Detroit. Martin Luther King also came around Aretha Franklin, so she had a chance to meet him. And then we had Sam Cooke. And then we had what we call James Brown, because many Black people, when they looked at their color, they was ashamed of their color. And so James Brown came out with "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I am proud." So a lot of things was infused amongst the Black church. We had independence. Our self-esteem was brought up through the Black church. We was not looked upon as society looked at us because the way we came here in America. So our backdrop was very important because we had to let our young people who were coming up that we were somebody. So the church centered around everything within our community. We had credit unions came out of the independence of the Baptist church. We had banks, and we had what we would call Black colleges. We had Morehouse, which is a great Black college in the South. We had Spelman, a Black college for women. So a lot of these things involve around the Black church. And once they received their education, they came back to the very places that they grew up. And then we had families who would take nickels and dimes in order to send their children to these colleges. And so the Black community was very resourceful with our people in the church. And then as I was a kid coming up out there in Buttonwillow, California, sometime we would have a time when we would kill hogs and we kill cattle, and we'd invite the neighbors to come over, and they all shared in, part of the hog, part of the cow. we grew up gardens and things like that, and we shared it through the community. So the community itself was a very important role within the Black community. And it's still today. We still are suffering today in some areas, and the church is still doing some of the same thing that they did from slavery up until the time today in America. So the church still play a very important part. We have societies, we have women's societies, we have the Masons, we have women's societies also in our mission groups, the conventions, the associations. The conventions make sure that churches in Africa are being maintained. That comes through our convention. So when you look at the Black church is made up of associations, it's made up of state conventions, it's made up of national conventions, and those national conventions send money from the local church overseas to make sure that the gospel is being spread. But at the same time, we also is dealing with things that's going on in our country today. So the Black church is still moving in the right direction. We started from slavery, but guess what? Through God's grace and through God's mercy, He has allowed us to be a focal point. We believe that God placed us here in America for a purpose, and that purpose is to show that we can develop ourselves. At the same time, we are able to deal with other nationalities. When you look at the sports, because of the sports program, we have great players. We had Jackie Robinson, we had Jesse Owens, who went to Germany, and when he came back from Germany, he was not able to go to where a hotel that they was honoring him. He had to go through the back door. So a whole lot of things happened, but guess what? We did not let this stop us, and so that's why reading this book, I am no ways tired, because I realize that there's work still need to be done here in America and in the world. So that's what I have to offer to you today, to let you know that God has been good to us, and He's still good to us, and He also expects us to keep things moving. So when we come on Sundays and begin to worship, we sing songs of joy. The preacher preaches to the people to let them know that God is still in control of everything. And so in doing frustration, we turn to the church, because we believe the church is what brought us here in America to be able to reach out and tell dying men that God is still in control, and we still are doing the same thing today, also here in America. I believe that I got about 15 minutes. I hope that 15 minutes that you learned something about the Black church and about the Black family, because in our families, we also realized that the women played a strong role. When the father was not there in the home, they were the one that carried the children to Sunday school, to BTU. They were the one who, when you see it, most athletes, when they talk about who brought them, who took care of them, they all recognize their mother, because the mother played a very important part when the father was not there in the home. So we had the father, the mother, the grandfather, the aunts and uncles, all of them played a very important role in all of our lives within the Black church. They were instrumental in helping us. I learned how to read in Sunday school. My grandfather, in the church I was in, my grandfather was my teacher. My uncle also was the adult Sunday school teacher. We only had 2 classes, and my grandfather made sure before I could go to the adult class, I need to know how to read. And so I come from a family church. There was about 60 of us in that church. We was cousins, we was nephews. It was a family church. But I thank God that He allowed me to be able to get to where I am today in the church.
Thank you, Pastor Calhoun. What I really hear you saying is that the church home, that church as a place that affirmed and continues to affirm the humanity of the African American people, and remains now a source of your community. Thank you. And now we will hear from Elder Alan Salazar.
Amanat Netawan Alan Salazar, Puchuk Yayak, Kasekfa Nukasin, Chagayanga, Tapu Nukasin. Hello, I'm Alan Salazar, fast runner. I'm from the villages of Kasekfa, what we now call San Fernando, California, where I was born. But we trace back to two villages, the Chumash village of Tapu, which is in Simi Valley, California, and Chagoyanga, which is in Santa Clarita. Actually, Magic Mountain is built over it. What I want to talk to you about is as a tribal person, as an indigenous person, what does home mean to me? What is my connection to the land? And I want to give you a few references. And I'm not going to go in any, I have a few notes jotted down here, which is something I very rarely do. But my Chumash ancestors, we are one of the oldest tribes in North America. We can prove scientifically that we have been here over 13,000 years. So in 1959, some archaeologists were working on Santa Rosa Island off the coast of Ventura. And while doing some scraping to cut a road to get to this Arlington Spring, a natural water spring on Santa Rosa Island, because they knew there were some extremely old village sites down by this natural water source on Santa Rosa Island. Well, they exposed a leg bone of a Chumash man, and they took that leg bone, they encased it in dirt, took it back to the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, and they left it there for many years. They knew the science of for carbon dating was not very advanced yet, and they waited for the science to catch up. And then in the late 1900s and the early 2000s, they did some carbon dating testing of this leg bone of this Chumash man, and it was determined that the Arlington Spring man was over 13,000 years old, between 13,000 to 13,500 years. So my Chumash ancestors have called this home for tens of thousands of years. And when I think of what I do in my daily life, what I do when I do ceremony, I never say a prayer to open an event. So Saturday I'll be at the Oak Brook Chumash Museum with kids from the Ventura Indian Education Consortium, and I will open with an opening blessing and an opening prayer. And in my opening blessing and opening prayer, I always acknowledge Mother Earth, and I always make an offering to Mother Earth. I like tobacco, so I get tobacco and usually put a little white sage, maybe some cedar, old ancient plants. Tobacco is a very ancient plant, and many spiritual people, indigenous spiritual people, use it as an offering back to Mother Earth to thank her for everything that she gives us. But besides prayer, you can look at our stories. So as we know, storytelling is something that humans have been doing for 30, 40, 50, 60,000 years. It's a large part of every culture that's here tonight. And in our traditional stories, and even in our news stories, our connection to the land is very prominent. There's a story, a Rainbow Bridge story, and we're not sure where exactly this Rainbow Bridge story came from, which part of the Chumash culture. There's various, there's 6 distinct Chumash groups: Island Chumash, Mountain Chumash, Northern Chumash, Ventureño Chumash, Barbareño Chumash, Obaseño Chumash. And we're not quite sure where this story came from, but for the last 50, 60 years, Chumash storytellers have told the story of the Rainbow Bridge and variations of it. And to me, one of the most important parts of the Rainbow Bridge story is that it says Hutash, the Mother Earth Spirit, created the Chumash people, that she spread the seeds of a special plant on the island of Limu, the island that we now call Santa Cruz Island. And when that plant grew, instead of flowers blooming or fruit blooming from that plant, the Chumash people bloomed from that plant. So what does that mean? That means that the Chumash people believe that we came from here. This is our home. I say this all the time. I was born in San Fernando, California because of the San Fernando Mission. My ancestors were brought to the San Fernando Mission starting in 1799. So for the last 5-6 generations, I was born in San Fernando. My father was born in San Fernando. My grandparents were born in San Fernando. My great-grandparents were born in San Fernando. My great-great-grandparents were born in San Fernando. My great-great-great-great-grandparents were born in San Fernando because they were brought to the San Fernando Mission. But prior to that, we were from those villages that I mentioned earlier. But our connection to the land has never left us. It's what unites us. It's what makes us strong. What keeps us together. A year ago, I wrote this book. And yes, this is a shameless plug for my book. But I wrote this book, this story, a year ago. And let me read you the beginning of the story, because it's what we're talking about tonight. This is a story of a young Tataviam towhee bird. Today we call them California towhees, but Tata was hatched long ago near the Tataviam village of Painga, near the modern-day Castaic Lake in Southern California, hence Tataviam towhee. So I realized quite a few years ago that the Chumash is a very large tribe. There were over 20,000 Chumash people when the Spanish came down our coast in the 1600s. The Tataviam were a very small tribe. There were only 2,000 or 3,000 of us. And by the end of the mission period, and by the end of the genocide of early California, there were less than 100 of us. We were almost extinct. So our language is pretty well lost. We're going to have to use similar languages to revitalize our language, the Serrano, the Tonga language. And our stories are almost all lost. So I decided to start writing stories in the spirit of my Tataviam ancestors. And this was my first book. And the importance of that is that to show you how important the land is to me, I didn't say this is a story of a young California towhee. No, this towhee bird was born in Tataviam territory. That makes him Tataviam. I just finished my second book. It will be out in about 6 weeks to 2 months, and it's a creation story. And in my creation story that I wrote a year ago also, it's taken us a long time to illustrate it and get it all put together. I only went to Bakersfield Junior College, and if there's any other fellow renegades out there, I don't mean this as a put down, but I realized Bakersfield Junior College is not in the top 100 ranked higher institutions in America, and all I took was freshman English. So the editors take a long time to edit my stories and proofread them and make corrections and changes. But I wrote this creation story a year ago also, and in it, it says that the Council of Animals created the Tataviam people. And they decided what our feet would be like, what our hands would be like, what color our eyes would be. And then they also discussed what color our skin would be. And Coyote wanted us to be like him. And Coyote has a lot of different colors. He has grayish and brownish and tannish and reddish and black and white. He has all these different colors mixed in. And they go, no, we don't think that the Chavin people look good like that. And Turtle looked around, he looked at all the animals, he looked at the sky, he looked at the plants, and he looked at Mother Earth. And when he saw that beautiful brown dirt, he said, oh, the Chavin people should be brown. So even in my stories, I incorporate the earth. This is where we are from. And I'll close with this. My family moved to Bakersfield when I was in junior high, and I went to Sierra Junior High, and then I went to Foothill Junior High. To show you how I have mellowed, if there's any BHS drillers here tonight, I have no problem anymore. We did beat you severely in 1965 and ended your winning streak of 3 years. That's another story. But when I lived in Bakersfield, as you all know, in Bakersfield, you do two things. You leave in the winter to avoid the valley fog, and you leave in the summer to avoid the valley heat. And we would come to Ventura. It was our getaway place. We didn't go to the Central Coast. We went to Ventura. And I noticed when we got past Gorman and we got to the downgrade dropping into Castaic, I would have just a strange feeling. My stomach would feel very relaxed. The only way I can explain it is if you've been on a diet and you've been consuming 1,000 calories a day and you've eaten millions of carrots and millions of pieces of celery, and after 6 months you finally have dropped that 20 pounds, and now you're going to reward yourself with a bowl of chocolate chip ice cream from Superior Dairy in Hanford, California. That feeling of that first bite of ice cream that you haven't had for 6 months, that's what I felt when I dropped into Castaic. And I didn't say anything to anyone, but it was a physical emotion. I'd be driving, my kids are in the back, my wife was next to me, and I never said anything. And then finally, when I moved back to Ventura and I started thinking about being back in my homeland, I remembered those hundreds of times, not dozens, hundreds of times driving down into Castaic and having that feeling of like, I'm home. That's how Indigenous people feel about their homeland, their territory. That's why we have served in every branch of the armed services. That's why we have fought in every major war that America hasn't fought in, because we love this land. We fought in all the wars, starting in 1776. We fought in World War I, and we weren't even citizens. My father was born in 1924 when Native Americans gained U.S. citizenship. Stop and think about that. In 1924, the first inhabitants, the indigenous, the First Nation peoples, just became citizens of the United States. And that's the year my pop was born. And he went to Saipan in Okinawa as a Marine and fought to protect his homeland, to fight for America, because we love this land. I'm Native American. I'm proud of both. Thank you. I hope I didn't go over too much of my time.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, what I really hear is that home is a connection to Mother Earth and a deep love for the land. And I also hear the land, the earth, that as your home loves you back. Thank you. And now we will hear from Dr. Anil Mehta.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. The message I will deliver is from the ancient Indian texts, the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedanta, which is thousands of years old, this wisdom passed down to us from the sages. And we discuss that every Sunday on Zoom. We have Zoom classes. So the way I'll be talking about home is from 5 levels. I don't know if people like numbers, but the first one is the home that we grew up in, our parents' home. And that's where we always feel welcome. We always loved that place. I grew up there. We grew up in India. And so that was our home. The second home is the home that I built, or all of us build after we leave our parents' house. And we put all our effort and time and money into that home. And that is what I call a home. But the Bhagavad Gita, the teacher in the Bhagavad Gita says, my devotee has no home. What do they mean? What they mean is that either if it's my parents' home or my home, we get a sense of achievement that I have done something and I have put all this effort and it is my home and I own it. But the Lord says that everything belongs to me. So whatever I have, whatever I possess belongs to God and has been given to me to use. So this home I live in, I'm a tenant. And I should always express my gratitude to God, always express this sense that I do not own anything. Everything belongs to Him, and I'm thankful for whatever has been given. So that is the second level of home, which has been addressed very well in the book that we have been discussing today. The third level of home is this body, and I occupy this body. And we know that this body is my home because we always say my body. That means I am the owner of the body. And who occupies the body? We say it is the subtle body, which we call as the mind and the intellect, which gives life to this body. And then, but it gets life from somewhere else. We'll talk about that later. But this subtle body is the one that at the time of death leaves the body and then goes to other worlds. And all scriptures talk about heaven and hell. And based on my actions, this body, which is cremated or buried and left behind to become one with the earth. But there is some entity called the individuality, which we call the jiva, that occupies this body. And then based on its actions, on its karmas, then enjoys other worlds. So that is the third home. The fourth home is what we call as heaven, which everybody wants to go to. And we believe that heaven is not the ultimate home. We do not live in heaven forever. But heaven is a place, it's like Hawaii multiplied 100 times, where I go or where we go to enjoy our good karmas, whatever actions we have done. We enjoy them and we live there maybe a few hundred years, few thousand years. But then eventually the individual has to leave heaven and come back to earth to continue his or her journey. So we believe in this reincarnation where this individual soul, which we call the subtle body or the soul, continues through various births and deaths while enjoying on this earth, doing the good actions and bad actions, and then enjoying the consequences of this in other worlds. So that is our fourth home. But our real home, which we all need to go, we all have to go until this soul does not complete its journey to this fifth home, it will continue through this cycle of birth and death. And the fifth home we call as Brahman, or as consciousness, or as Om, because we greet each other with Hari Om. Om, or Brahman, or the total consciousness, which is bigger than this whole universe. The universe is trillions of miles. Brahman extends even beyond that. It is the substratum on which this whole universe stands. So this earth or these other planets are supported by this consciousness, which we call as Brahman, the substratum. And it is of the nature of existence, consciousness, and bliss. So we exist because of this entity, which is existence. I am sentient, I am alive because I derive my consciousness from that substratum. And the subtle body or the individuality also derives its life from that total consciousness, which supports us and which is infinite. And this consciousness is neither male nor female. So we don't say, in our spirituality, consciousness is referred to as that which is this, which is everything. So God is neither male nor female. God does not belong to any particular religion, does not belong to any particular sect, does not belong to any nationality, but all religions, all nationalities, all people come from that one God. And so we are all one because we all came from one origin. And that's why we have a famous phrase, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, means we all belong to one family, which is the family of God. And we believe that all religions take us to that same goal. And we are all one. That's why Jesus said that love thy neighbor as thyself. And the goal of life is to become one with that. And that is called realization. That is called enlightenment. That is what Buddha called as nirvana. That's what Jesus said. He who hath seen my Father has seen me, which means me and the Father in heaven are not separate. So that is what we tell our people. That is what our scriptures tell us, that your goal of life is to reach enlightenment, to become one with that. And how do we do that? What is the path? So we say that the path is threefold. One is through the path of service. So you serve the world, but humbly as a servant of God, as his agent or her agent or agent of God, without ego, without any arrogance, without even expecting any results from your service. So the path of service. Second is through the path of love, where I love God and develop a relationship of love with God and love all my fellow beings as God's creation. So the path of service and the path of love. The third and the most important is the path of knowledge. And all three have to go together. Some people may be more service oriented. Some people may be more emotional. Some people may choose the path of knowledge. But through knowledge, I come to realize my oneness with that totality, that there is only one which has appeared as many. And so that through meditation, through yoga, through breath control, and through study of the scriptures from a guru, we very much believe that a guru is required, a teacher is required to give us this knowledge. And in our case, it was Puja Gurudev Swami Chinmayananda who started this teaching for us. He dropped his body in 1993, but his students continue this message. So we believe in the oneness of all, and that God and I are not separate. We are one, and oneness is that the essence of our teaching, and that is our ultimate home. If until I reach that home, we believe that the soul has to continue its journey of birth and death, birth and death. And since all religions come from one source, all of us are one, we don't believe in conversion. We believe that the knowledge should be given to everybody, and whoever wishes to take this knowledge can do that, because all religions are equal. We don't consider one religion superior to the other or one path superior to the other. As long as your goal is to reach that highest, that is the ultimate. And so our ultimate goal, our ultimate home is that one consciousness, which is the one that is enlivening everything. Even the rocks come from that. The rocks don't have life. The plants have a limited life. Animals, birds, fish are more evolved, and humans are the highest evolved species. And so only in a human life can you reach enlightenment, can you study the scriptures and become one with that totality. So that is what we understand as home. That's why we greet each other with Hari Om, which can be translated as Hari Home. Let us all quickly hurry back to our home. And whatever path we take, it doesn't matter. Whatever book you read doesn't matter. Whichever building you worship in doesn't matter. Whichever language you worship in doesn't matter. Most important is the feeling of love for God, the communication, and the oneness, not only with God, but with all fellow beings. So as I said, to summarize, we consider home at 5 levels: my parents' home, my home that I built. This body is a home that I occupy temporarily and which I have to leave at death to continue my journey. Heaven is the 4th home where I enjoy, but the real home, the final home, is that oneness with the totality, where then I disappear. The individuality disappears in the totality, just as a wave appears from the ocean and merges back into the ocean and becomes the ocean. It's not that the wave disappears, but the wave becomes one with ocean because it realizes that every wave is me, every part of the ocean is me. So that totality is what we go for, and that is what we aim for. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share our ancient wisdom. We'll be happy to answer any questions at the end if anybody would like. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It's never expected to have so many levels of home. I love how the true home, the real home, is that oneness with consciousness and God, and oneness with our fellow beings. Thank you. Thank you for that. And now we'll hear from Rabbi Klein.
Thank you very much. My remarks may be in a slightly different direction along the way. The question of home for Jews has always been really about literally the home. We have this tradition that the home is really the center of it all. Judaism really, I think some of it has to do with our focus on this world. Homes ultimately are about what's happening in this world. It is not afterlife or anything like that. Jews will wear a necklace that says Chai, which means life, affirming what's happening in this world is at the center of the conversation. And at the center of that center is where we spend, especially during the pandemic, the most of our time. We put a mezuzah on our front doors. Here's an example of a mezuzah that is meant to be a little bit of a, in medieval times, it was seen as an amulet to protect a home from all the potential bad things that could happen. But really, it's a symbol of Jewish life, but it's also a symbol of a Jewish home. We have a tradition of creating what's called a Birkat HaBayit. It's almost a decorative thing, a blessing of the home. And most of them will say something along the lines of, let no sorrow come through this gate. Let no trouble come into this dwelling. Let no fright come through this door. Let no conflict come to this department. Let there be blessing and peace in this place. And so we spend a tremendous amount of time talking about the home. When a couple gets married, I typically will perform, Jewish weddings take place under a chuppah, which is this central visual symbol of the Jewish wedding. People will call it a marriage canopy, but for Jews, it's a symbol of a home, literally the home that is being built by the couple. And at weddings, I typically say the following little litany, as I guess you could say. I say the chuppah is a powerful symbol. The space beneath this chuppah is a Garden of Eden, and you two are the first human beings. In your union, a new world is formed, and the miracle of creation is renewed. The poles of the chuppah, which are these poles that are, that hold this wedding canopy, the poles of the chuppah are sturdy, held secure by dear friends in some instances, and yet they are easily lifted and carried, just as the ancient sukkah, or the desert booth, which is basically the desert home in which our biblical ancestors dwelt, was carried, teaching that the home you create together, I say this to the couple, is in your palm, in your pocket, anywhere that you are together, it is home. The covering of the chuppah provides shade, protects you from the forces of nature that threaten your well-being, that your home shall be a refuge even during stormy days. And like the clouds of glory protecting the ancient Israelites as they wandered in the desert, your home will be sheltered with God's presence. And finally, the walls of the chuppah are open, flooded with light, so that the love and support of your family and community might breeze in and lift you up, and that your union might burst forth with the blushes and shimmers of a sunrise to inspire us. That's what a home is. It is a place, it's basically in a Jewish worldview where it all happens. It's the thing. If you know the story of Fiddler on the Roof, you know that a lot of that portrays a village. But what is the village? It's primarily the portrayal of what's happening in the home. And we'll come back to that shortly. The word bayit, which means house, is at the root of all sorts of things that are not a home. A Beit Knesset is a house of assembly or the synagogue. Har Habayit was the mountain of the temple, or the Temple Mount, the place where the ancient temple was. Beit HaMikdash is the temple itself. It's literally the house of holiness, really the house of the holy entity, the house of the holy space, I guess you could say, would be a good translation. A Beit Sefer is a house of the book, or literally, but actually we would call it a school. When you go to the Beit Sefer, you're going to school. Beit Tefillah is a house of prayer, another name for synagogue. A Beit Din is a court, a space of justice, literally a house of justice. The city, Bethlehem, is actually Beit Lechem, the house of bread. It was a place where, I guess, a lot of breads were being made. And we call our community in Jerusalem, we call it Beit HaBechira, the chosen home. And in Los Angeles, there's a place called Beit Teshuvah, the home of repentance, literally a halfway house for addicts and people who are in recovery, where they can seek sobriety, but it's a residential space. And my son was living, when he was a student as an undergrad, he lived at the UCLA Bayit, literally the house. It's a dorm room where Jewish students would come together. And yes, it's true. In our tradition, we speak of Israel as a homeland. Literally a land where homes are. What is a homeland? It's a place where homes are said to be stable enough to be at the center, the axis mundi of Jewish life. But overwhelmingly, with all of these other terms for home, home literally means home because Judaism is a home-based religion. Those exploring Judaism spend significant time making sense of how to live daily lives in their homes. Most of our rituals are centered around home life. At Temple Bethel, we have used Zoom in this strange era. We've added value to the notion of home by using it as a technology, not just to show our worship services on Friday nights, which take place in the sanctuary, but also communal rituals that happen in people's homes. So for instance, we light Shabbat candles on Friday nights with the kids. Or on Saturday night, we close out Shabbat with Havdalah, a ritual that involves a special braided candle that's normally done in people's homes. So it's sort of taking the lid off of the privacy of the home by using the Zoom technology to bring everyone together. And I have mixed feelings, to be honest, about the way in which Judaism is brought out of the home and into the public sphere. I think at the core of our tradition, the home has been the centerpiece of it all, which is ironic because my work is in the synagogue. Judaism is a law-based religion, and so many of our laws are centered around home life. Kashrut, that is what we eat. People will keep multiple sets of dishes in their kitchen to represent the different kinds of foods that they're allowed to eat at different times, milk products or meat products. There's food-related prayers that are said at the dining table. Every morning when you wake up, you say, thank you, God. When you're kind of falling out of bed, you say a special prayer that thanks God for returning your soul. That's done at the home. And at nighttime, on the other side, bedtime Shema, we affirm God's oneness right before we go to sleep. And of course, Passover is this meal-based ritual meant for homes. We say, it's in Aramaic, but in English it would be, let all who are hungry come and eat. Inviting people into the home. It's even a tradition in many homes to open the door during the Passover Seder and say in a loud voice, let all who are hungry come and eat. And we open the door during the Passover Seder as well to welcome Elijah into our homes. Again, the Passover Seder being a home-based tradition around the dining table. The family with all of their energies going toward creating a delicious meal. There's an idyllic aspect of this. And this is not a surprise for anyone who watches Jewish-centered film. If you watch Netflix today, you constantly see ultra-Orthodox Jews being presented as almost never in the synagogue and almost always in their homes. If you've watched Shtisel or Unorthodox or the older film Upsharon, it's all home-based. It's all about the mother and the father it's a heteronormative culture that presents these families trying to figure out how to make it through in life. Fiddler on the Roof focuses on the Sabbath prayer, may the Lord protect and defend you, and you see the women rushing to get everything done in time for the Sabbath, candles being lit at home. My parents, relatively secular people, had dear friends, Sonia and Phil Silverman. Sonia took it upon herself to take my parents and make them Jews. How did she do that? She would give them presents, things that would be Jewish in feeling, that would make them feel Jewish. So their home ended up being surrounded by a pushka, a container for taking in charity to give to the poor. A nagelwasser for washing the hands. You have one of these, you're not going to throw it away because it's part of your home. A Kiddush cup. There are so many rituals that are connected to Jewish life that find their way into the home. Jewish art. And I didn't have enough time to pull them all out, but this is what makes a home feel like a safe environment for the Jewish community. This, of course, does create a lot of pressure for those who are in any way struggling. Single people who are trying to figure out how to make their lives full of these symbols, but doing them alone is very hard. Folks who want to but are unable to have children, who it breaks their heart. We have so many stories in the Bible about this, and it's an added challenge for people who really want to have children because who are in Jewish life, because so much of the home life is about raising children as well. Anyone brought up without stability, the Jewish people knows instability. And in fact, as a response to that instability, when we were the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, as Emma Lazarus famously stated on the Statue of Liberty, we were seeking home. And we hear that with so many of the other comments that were made. Abraham in the book of Genesis, when his wife Sarah dies, he is identified to the people in Hebron as a ger v'toshav, a resident alien, which is to say that he doesn't quite fit in. And so he's trying to seek home. Jews are known as the wandering Jews, one of instability. We say, Arami Oved Ami during Passover. We say, my father is a wandering Aramean. We've been meanderers. We've been all over, unsettled. Until the collapse of the Soviet Union, Jews who lived in the Soviet Union were not identified on their passports by their place of residence. They were labeled Jews. So, you know, today our struggle, I would say, is that as Jewish knowledge in America diminishes, history of our understanding of our traditions, increasingly the center of Jewish life has moved away from the home and into the synagogue. And while on some level that has been meaningful for the synagogue life to continue to perpetuate, it was never the idea that Jewish life would be centered there. And so that's am I going too long? I probably am. So I hear the chatter. So I will just close up and say that if there's anything that is important to Jewish perpetuation of Jewish life, it's to figure out how to create homes on whatever level that means, and without any predefined explanation of what that is. People need a home. And the last thing I'll say is that that's what homeless care providers have figured out. Today we have a movement in the public arena to push for housing first. Because once a home is established, all the other pressures can be addressed. So I hope that people have learned a thing or two about a Jewish approach to home.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. I am wondering if our panelists have any questions for one another. If you do, just raise your hand. All right, okay, I'm not seeing any questions for one another. So Melanie, do we have questions from the chat?
Just a couple. The first one that we have is for Elder Salazar. And let's see, it is from Lynn Kemmer. And she was curious where the Indian Education Consortium is based out of.
Ventura County Unified School District has had a consortium where about, I believe it's 8 to 10 school districts in Ventura County pool their resources. We were quite big. I've been involved with it for 25 years. And it's and if there's any educators there here, you'll probably know better. It's one of the Title IX, I believe, Title IX or Title VII, one of those. So it's federally funded. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, when it was first established, we had over 1,000 students in Ventura County that would identify as Indigenous or Native American. And we would send teachers to the schools, and they'd pull the students out for 30 or 40 minutes once or twice a week. And this year they're learning about the Chumash people. So next year they'll learn about great chiefs and things like that. But it's kind of hit and miss. LA Unified used to have an Indian Ed, and I'm not sure if they still do. They've all been cut back dramatically in the last few years with funding. And what they did was they required tribal identity. So they had to be from a recognized tribe and have a tribal card, which eliminated about 90% of our students that they still identified as Indigenous, but the Fernandino Tataviam are a fairly non-recognized tribe. The Chumash, the Ventureño Chumash are a fairly non-recognized tribe. So it's a complex issue, but they're great programs. They support the young students and let them learn about their indigenous ancestry.
Thank you. We have one other question for Elder Salazar. And it is, what do you think of land acknowledgements?
I think they're great. I tell people I went to public school, so I went to elementary school in Hanford, California, where my mom is from, and then moved to Bakersfield and went to junior high and high school, and from kindergarten to my senior year at Foothill High School, this is what I learned about California indigenous people, Native Americans. We weren't covered at all. So now schools here in Ventura County, all third grade classes learn about the local Native tribes. Fourth grades learn about the mission. And we're working on trying to get more the higher grades, high school, to cover California Indian history in the high school, so we can have more discussions about the brutal realities of the mission period, the bounty system in California in the 1840s and 1850s and 60s. So land acknowledgement is one of those steps along the way. The town I was born in, San Fernando, about 4 years ago, replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. So Bakersfield, step up to the plate.
All right, thank you. Next, Ann Gallen had a question related to food, and I'm going to ask her to unmute. And
thank you. I was thinking of this question about food as we were going along, and then Rabbi Klein almost blew my question out of the chat box with his wonderful presentation. But in the book, in the beginning of the book, the author was at Santa Cruz as a new student, didn't know anybody, and she finally found a little level of comfort, a beginning level of comfort, when she found some Latino students who were having a social time with some snacks of tacos. So that was her comfort food, and it became a little bit of a theme through the book. And in our Lutheran Christian faith, we celebrate the sacrament of communion as Jesus did, giving bread and wine. And also Lutheran potlucks are ubiquitous in our churches. Do any of the other people here in your spiritual backgrounds have a ceremonial role for food in your culture? Is there any commonality of how you treat food? And that our church also distributes food to people who are who need food. It's an issue, it's a problem, but we also gather around it, and it becomes part of our homes have food to share.
Dr. Mehta?
Yeah, I think when there is a famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita which says Brahmarpanam Brahma Havihi. So the one who grew the food is God. The one who cooked the food is God. The one who served the food is God. And the food itself that I'm going to consume is going to nourish God within. So the entire process of production, cooking, and eating of food becomes a religious exercise, because ultimately who is being nourished? God within us. So that is how we look at food. So there's a very famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita which addresses this topic of food.
Thank you.
To any of our, Rabbi Klein?
I'm happy to chime in, although I did definitely say a lot already about it. I think the famous example that is in some ways tied to a more ecumenical or multi-faith centrality because of at least portrayals of the Last Supper and the view that somehow that was Passover. And I have no claim of knowledge regarding the views on that. I would love to learn, actually. But I mean, I mentioned this idea of holding up a piece of matzah, and you say, "Halach ma'anya di achalu avahatana." This is the bread of suffering which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. All who are hungry, come and eat. All who are in need, let them come and partake in the Paschal offering. And how did they say this? Now we are here. Next year in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year, let us be free. Which is to say that home, like I said with the chuppah, is the place where you are, and you have to make the most of what that is. And sometimes it might be lemons, like those who were living in the concentration camps, children who in Terezin drew drawings to portray what they saw. They made that camp as much the home as anything. I once spoke to a woman who survived the camp. She was 3 years old when she was liberated. And she said that the greatest time in her life was when she was in that concentration camp, because she was there with her mother and the connection that they had. So I just think that we have to expand our understanding of home, but also not go so far away from how it can be a grounding thing for people. And it's an aspiration to create home.
Alan Salazar.
You know, I say this all the time when I'm talking to young people, but it's important for everybody. The Chataviam, the Shumash, one of our main food sources were the acorns from the oak trees. And it was tradition that the first acorns that fell from the tree, which are falling right about now, we never collected those. We left those for the animals. So that concept of sharing, not only with our fellow tribal members, with those in need, the elders eat first. We also believed that since we gathered the native plants and native foods, that so did the deer and the rabbit, which we hunted. So yes, we want the deer to be nice, big, plump, and fat. We're going to hunt them, but we also made sure that there was enough acorns for the woodpeckers, the blue jays, the mockingbirds, all those other little creatures that we didn't hunt, because they're just as important in this whole big scheme as we are, and we realize that. So that's my pitch on food. But I will take some homemade chocolate chip cookies if anyone has any.
I appreciate that, Alan, because you're pointing to the way in which land and home are interconnected. And just as a side comment, I think that's part of the travails of a conquest universe, and how uprooting disturbs that connection, or at least attempts to do so. As part of, I know, the Jewish experience, we were exiled out of land, and that means you don't have the space that it has any permanence for raising food, and that's a challenge.
Well, and when you look at food, I think food was a very, as slaves, we had to take what was offered to us. I mean, a lot of people don't believe in eating. We take say a hog, we take a pigtail, and we'd eat that. Then we take the feet. We take the intestinal, we take the greens, which we call soul food, because the only thing we could eat was what we were allowed to eat, and it became part of our culture, and it's still part of our culture today. We lived off of greens and, as I say, pig feet, which a lot of people don't eat pig feet. Chitlins, you don't eat no chitlins. So we learned how to survive on what was offered to us, and we made it a delicatessen. So when you look at a home, a home was a time where we had a spread of food that was set before us, and some people don't eat what we eat, but we call it soul food. And we call it soul food because it was centered around the church and the people who gathered there. And it was a time of coming together, and we had all those things in common. So as slaves, we had to use what was presented to us, and we made that a delicatessen. And today, you try to buy pig feet. Nobody don't eat pigtails, chitlins. It costs a lot in the store now. When chitlin was the only thing that the white plantation owner didn't eat, so he gave it to us, and we made it into a delicatessen. So food is a very important part centered around us as a people. And my wife comes from the South, and they had their way of doing things. If you're from Northern Louisiana or you're from Southern Louisiana, they had different foods. And so I just enjoy eating food. Yeah.
We have one more question from the chat box, and it is from Marjorie. And she mentioned that California students will soon be required to take an ethnic studies class to graduate high school. Do you support this idea, and why or why not?
Well, I support that idea because when I was coming, up in high school, we would hear, it was really nothing about myself or who I was. They always had George Washington Carver, which was a great man. He saved the South with the peanuts. But I think as more people learn about the various nationalities and what they are doing, I think it would go a long ways here in America, because I was at loss. I was grown before I really began to study what we call African American history. And so it blew my mind when I found out all the things we invented, the washing machine, the red light, and the cotton gin, so when people began to see the history, then they will find out there's a lot of things that many people of other races have brought to this country. I didn't realize we had black cowboys, and come to find out, we was the one. I didn't realize that the Kentucky Derby, most of the jockeys at first were black jockeys in the Kentucky Derby. And I had to be grown to learn that, because I always seen jockeys as being white or Hispanic. So, bull riders, we were the one who was first bull rider. So it's a lot of history out there that I think would help many nationalities, and by doing this, we'll begin to come together as a people. So I think it's very important.
Yeah, I agree with Pastor Calhoun. I think America is a land of immigrants, except for Mr. Salazar's. All the rest of us came from other parts of the world to settle here. And so I think it's very important to know about other cultures, to know about other people. And that brings people together when you understand their history and their culture and their food and their habits. You come to understand that everybody basically has the same goals in life. If you look at the religious books, and if you don't have the author, whether you put Jesus or Buddha or Krishna, when you put them up there, you will find that you can't tell who is the author if you didn't have the language, if you put all in English, because all the books ultimately point to one goal. So ethnic studies will show us that there is one that has become many, and that is why I think ethnic studies is a very good idea. Thanks.
Alan, you had something to say also?
Yeah, and I'll just say ditto to that. I've said this for many years. we have more things in common than we do differences. So any opportunities for young people to learn about the different cultures that make America what it is, this wonderful melting pot. And I think after a few years of ethnic studies classes, I think people will calm down and realize that one of the big lessons is that we have more things in common. We've all had the same struggles. When I listen to the pastor talk about button willow and you know, pig's feet and pigtails, as an indigenous person, I identify with that because we went through the same struggles during the mission period. We have more things in common than we do differences. And I'll go back to that uh, uh, earlier question about land acknowledgement. The land acknowledgement is just the first step, and the and ethnic studies is just the first step. Our history classes do not teach the true histories. There's nothing political about teaching the true history. Let's teach the true history. How many people out here, raise your hand, push a little button there in the bottom. How many people here know about the bounty system in California from 1849 to 1873? Raise your hand if you've heard of the bounty system in California. How many hands are up? I see one, but I only see a few pictures. That's what I mean. Let's just teach the true history. Reverend Calhoun, I'm sure wants the true history. I want to learn the true history about Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism. Knowledge is a gift.
Since I recognize that I'm the last panelist to speak on this, I'll just say that I certainly support this. I know that it has been at moments a tense conversation within the Jewish community because the first rounds of proposed curriculum did not really account for the Jewish experience and created some real anguish within Jewish circles. And so the question of how to teach this, I think the theory of teaching it is essential. We need to find a way to teach it. We also have to be sensitive to the way in which people wish to present their history may not be a universally understood approach. And so I am most definitely supportive of ethnic studies, and as are most of I think the Jewish caucus in the State Assembly and Senate both support this. But there is a concern that there are winners and losers that are impacted. And sometimes those winners and losers are within the communities that are not the dominant culture in the state of California. They are within that world. And so within the diversity of our community. So we want to make sure that there is attention to that. But fundamentally, we as a society will never grow. We will never understand one another if we keep people ignorant of the history and the experience and the struggles and the pain and even the injustices that have been endured by people in this state and really throughout the world. So I'm a strong proponent of ethnic studies education with an understanding that I'm also a humanist who wants to believe that we can rise above our divisions and through our knowledge of it, still come out loving one another, loving those who are not us. So I appreciated the introduction to me as someone who is deeply committed to diversity. I am. I believe it as one of the only ways in which we can survive as a society, by learning about one another, celebrating one another, and not cutting each other down endlessly, which unfortunately I think our culture has turned in that direction. We got to work together. And that includes understanding one another.
So there's just so much to absorb and think about. So I thank the panelists, and I particularly thank the participants for entering into the discussion and making it come alive. I want to remind you that one of the foundational things of the One Book initiative from the very beginning for Bakersfield was that the book had to feature a living author, so no classics, from the 19th century or earlier. And that author had to be willing to come to Bakersfield to talk to us. And Bakersfield is not on any big circuit of author visits. So it's really very special when the authors come. They're not only great writers, but they have been screened to be by Emerson Case at CSUB, who is the head of the first year experience, to also be very effective speakers. So this year, the author will come. It has had to be Zoom, unfortunately, for the last 2 years. It will be this year as well. But they will present on Thursday, November 18th at 7 p.m. So that is always very worthwhile to conclude the program by listening to the author's actual remarks. So at this point, again, I will say thank you and good night.
Questions?